You can have a biological crisis unfolding in your body for a decade, and your brain will just actively hide it from you. You feel completely fine. You pass your casual health checks. You do your long morning commute. You sit at your desk for like 8 hours, and you grab takeaway meals a few nights a week just to keep up with the pace of life.
Right. It all just feels normal.
Exactly. Nothing feels dramatic day to day. But beneath the surface, your finely tuned biological engine is being pushed into just absolute unrelenting overload.
That quiet, invisible buildup is, it's the reality for millions of people every single day. Welcome to TalkKast, by the way. What you're describing is the hidden runway to metabolic overload. And it's really the exact starting point we need to understand how our bodies actually manage fuel.
I really want to focus on how that gradual lifestyle overload leads specifically to type 2 diabetes. But, I want to frame this differently today. Not as this grim medical sentence, but really as an exploration of our internal mechanics.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because I feel like once you understand the underlying biology, you realize a diagnosis is often not this permanent one-way road.
That is a vital distinction to establish right away.
Mm-hmm.
People so often assume that once they cross that diagnostic line, their fate is sealed. Like the story's completely written. But the system is actually, it's remarkably dynamic.
That's reassuring.
Right. To understand why people feel perfectly fine right up until the moment they get a diagnosis, we have to look at the massive physiological cover-up happening behind the scenes.
And that is the part that always catches my attention. I mean, how exactly does someone feel completely normal when their biology is fundamentally struggling? If a central system is failing, shouldn't there be obvious alarm bells?
You would certainly think so.
Yeah.
But it comes down to a phase called prediabetes. It's a stage that spans years, and it is characterized by zero obvious symptoms.
Wow. Zero symptoms.
Literally none. The reason you don't feel sick is that your pancreas is performing this incredible, desperate balancing act to keep your blood sugar looking completely normal.
Let me make sure I understand that. The pancreas is essentially hiding the problem. What is it actually doing?
Well, in the early stages of metabolic overload, your cells become resistant to insulin. We'll get into the exact mechanics of that resistance shortly, but the immediate result is that glucose starts building up in the blood.
Okay, I follow you.
Your pancreas senses this rising blood sugar, and its response is just brute force. It simply works overtime, producing massive amounts of extra insulin to overcome the cellular resistance.
So it's just overpowering the resistance with sheer volume.
Exactly. And for years, that massive overproduction of insulin is highly effective. It forces the blood sugar back down into a normal range. So if you just take a standard fasting blood glucose test during this window, everything looks perfectly fine.
That sounds so much like driving an engine into the red zone for thousands of miles. I mean, the car is still doing 60 miles an hour, so you think the vehicle is fine. But the engine is experiencing massive, unsustainable wear and tear.
That's a perfect analogy.
And then suddenly, the check engine light finally comes on. The problem feels abrupt to the driver, even though the mechanical struggle was happening for years.
That is exactly the reality of the timeline. The biology is not sudden at all, only your awareness of it is. Eventually, the pancreas just cannot sustain that massive overproduction.
It just burns out.
Essentially, yes. The specific cells that manufacture insulin, the beta cells, become physically exhausted. The toxic environment of high insulin and high circulating fats literally degrades them. That's when your blood sugar finally breaks through the resistance and starts creeping up.
Which means relying purely on how you feel is a terrible strategy. If the biology is hiding the struggle, we have to look at the long-term numbers.
The numbers tell the story the body is trying to conceal. The A1C test is crucial here because it measures your average blood sugar over roughly a 3-month period, rather than just a single snapshot in time.
And what are the numbers we should be looking out for?
An A1C of 5.7 to 6.4% puts you squarely in the prediabetes range. If you wait until you actually feel the classic symptoms of full-blown diabetes, like, extreme thirst, frequent urination, or blurred vision, the system has already been failing for a very long time.
Okay, so the system fails quietly over a decade, but let's look at what normal function is actually supposed to look like. We need a clear picture of what is breaking down. We often hear that old locks and keys analogy for insulin, but I'd really like to visualize this differently to grasp the mechanics.
I agree. The lock and key thing is a bit played out. A better way to picture your bloodstream is to think of it as a highly structured, tightly scheduled subway system.
Okay, a subway system, I like that.
Right. The glucose molecules from the food you eat are the passengers waiting on the platform. The cells in your muscles and liver are the train cars.
So where does insulin fit into that transit system? Are they the conductors?
Precisely. Insulin molecules are the conductors on the platform. Their entire job is to open the doors and usher the passengers into the train cars so the platform stays clear and functional.
That makes sense.
And at the exact same time, insulin sends a signal to your liver. The liver acts like a secondary transit hub that stores emergency buses, basically extra glucose. Insulin tells the liver, hey, the platform is full right now, do not send any more passengers.
I see. So in a healthy system, you eat, passengers flood the platform, the conductors open the doors, the trains fill up, the liver holds back, and the platform empties. You don't feel a thing. It's totally automatic.
Right. But when insulin resistance develops, that scenario changes completely. The train cars, your cells, are already packed tight with energy. The passengers inside are literally pushing back against the doors. The conductors are trying to usher new glucose in, but the doors just will not budge.
So the pancreas responds by just sending thousands of extra conductors to forcefully shove people into the cars?
Yes, that's the massive overproduction we talked about earlier. But here is where the real chaos happens. Because the insulin signal is getting lost in all this resistance, the liver doesn't get the message to hold back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it senses that the cells are starving for energy because glucose isn't getting inside them. So the liver starts dumping its emergency passengers onto an already overcrowded platform.
Wait, if the bloodstream is already packed with sugar, why on earth does the liver add more? That seems entirely counterproductive.
Because the liver cannot see the blood. It only listens to the hormonal signals from the cells. The cells are saying, we have no glucose inside here, so the liver assumes you are starving. It dumps more glucose into the blood, creating a massive, dangerous gridlock.
That paints a very chaotic picture, but I really want to understand the actual physical danger of that gridlock. We usually think of sugar as harmless energy. Why is a high concentration of glucose in the blood inherently destructive?
Well, because the bloodstream is meant to be a rapid transport highway, not a long-term holding tank. When blood glucose stays chronically high, a process called glycation occurs. The excess glucose molecules literally stick to the proteins and lipids that make up your blood vessel walls.
So the sugar is physically altering the structures of the vessels themselves?
Exactly. It makes the vessels stiff, brittle, and prone to inflammation. Think of your larger blood vessels as the main plumbing of a house, and your microscopic vessels and nerves as intricate electrical wiring. Chronically high glucose slowly erodes and hardens both the plumbing and the wiring.
That actually explains a lot. That's why diabetes is never just an isolated issue. It degrades the microvessels in the eyes, the kidneys, the toes, and it damages the major vessels leading to the heart. It's a systemic degradation of the transport network itself.
That is the grim reality of the physical damage. And it brings up a crucial distinction between type 2 and type 1 diabetes, which often get conflated in public discussions.
I am so glad you brought that up. Let me ask you directly about that. If someone has type 2 diabetes, and their pancreas becomes so exhausted that it stops making enough insulin, meaning they eventually need to take insulin injections, does that mean their condition has fundamentally turned into type 1 diabetes?
No, not at all. They are entirely different diseases. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition. The body's immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys the beta cells in the pancreas.
I see.
Going back to our subway analogy, the body permanently loses the ability to manufacture conductors. You must provide conductors from the outside via injections simply to survive.
So type 1 is a total lack of conductors, whereas type 2 is a problem with jammed train doors and an overcrowded platform.
Precisely. Even if a person with type 2 diabetes reaches a point where their pancreas is too exhausted to produce insulin, the root cause is still metabolic overload and cellular resistance. They still have type 2.
That's a really helpful way to look at it.
And this distinction dictates what is possible for the future. You can potentially clear the gridlock of type 2, which is why remission is possible. Type 1 currently cannot be reversed in that way.
That leads us right into the concept of remission. Because if type 2 is about jammed doors and an exhausted factory, it stands to reason that if we clear the gridlock, we might be able to restore the system. But we need to define remission strictly without offering false promises.
The medical definition is very specific. Remission means that a person's blood sugar has fallen below the diabetes range, and it has stayed below that range for at least 3 months, entirely without the use of glucose-lowering medication.
Notice you are using the word remission, not cure. I assume that's highly intentional.
Highly intentional. Using phrases like cured or reversed forever misleads people. Remission means the system has recovered enough to function normally under current conditions.
Yeah.
but the underlying susceptibility remains.
Right.
If the metabolic overload returns, or if the pancreas has permanently lost a large percentage of its beta cells over the years, the gridlock will return. It was a state of management.
That is a very grounded way to look at it. So how do people actually clear this gridlock? What relieves the pressure on the system?
The single most consistent biological lever for achieving remission is the reduction of visceral fat.
I want to pause right there because this reminds me of a conversation we had on another TalkKast, the one called Why You're Not Losing Weight. We talked about how fat is not just inactive tissue where your body stores extra calories.
That is exactly the connection we need to make. The fat that accumulates around the abdomen and gets packed tightly inside and around internal organs like the liver and the pancreas is called visceral fat. It is fundamentally different from subcutaneous fat, which is just under the skin. Visceral fat is an active endocrine organ.
Meaning it actively releases hormones and chemicals into the body.
Yes, it pumps out inflammatory cytokines that directly interfere with insulin signaling. In our subway metaphor, visceral fat is like a group of people standing in front of the train doors, actively barricading them so the passengers cannot get in.
So by losing that specific visceral fat, you are removing the physical and chemical obstruction that is causing the insulin resistance in the first place.
Exactly. When you clear out the fat from the liver and the pancreas, the beta cells can wake up and function normally again. The liver stops aggressively dumping excess sugar.
That's fascinating.
It really is. Even a relatively small reduction in visceral fat can dramatically improve how the doors operate, but a significant reduction is often what triggers full remission.
That is a massive biological lever. But let's move beyond just REIT, because treating health like a single variable problem is rarely effective. What are the other everyday levers people can pull to bypass this broken system? Let's start with physical movement.
Movement is fascinating because it offers an immediate mechanical workaround to insulin resistance. Remember that muscles are the biggest consumers of glucose in your body.
Right, but if the insulin system is broken, how does the muscle get the glucose?
That is the most incredible part. Muscle contractions can physically open glucose channels entirely independently of insulin.
Let me make sure I'm hearing that correctly.
Yeah.
You can literally bypass the broken insulin system just by moving.
Yes. When you engage your muscles, even something as simple as walking briskly, the physical contraction forces specialize glucose transporters to the surface of the cell. You're essentially opening side doors to the subway cars that do not even require conductors.
That is a huge insight. You are manually clearing the platform.
Exactly. Going from sitting at a desk all day to taking a brisk walk after a meal causes a rapid, measurable drop in blood sugar. It physically bypasses the resistance.
We've talked about how muscles clear out the glucose, but what happens when the body's overall stress system is activated? I'm thinking specifically about sleep deprivation. It feels like the lever everyone ignores because being tired is just accepted as a normal part of adulthood.
Sleep is the foundation that the rest of the metabolic system rests upon. Poor sleep directly and aggressively worsens insulin resistance.
How so? What is the actual mechanism there?
When you are sleep deprived, your body perceives it as a state of stress and danger. It ramps up the production of cortisol, our primary stress hormone.
I've heard of cortisol.
Right. High cortisol signals the liver to initiate a fight or flight response, which means the liver starts aggressively dumping its emergency glucose into the blood to give you energy to fight off whatever threat is keeping you awake.
So you could be managing your food perfectly, exercising daily, but if you are sleeping 4 hours a night, your liver is just flooding the platform with extra passengers anyway.
Exactly. Your numbers will keep climbing because the underlying stress physiology is overriding your lifestyle efforts. It is a fully integrated system.
That makes complete sense. And speaking of food, we should address the volume aspect. People often get a prediabetes warning and immediately assume fruit and carbohydrates are the ultimate villains they must eliminate entirely.
The demonization of specific foods is biologically inaccurate and psychologically exhausting. A bowl of berries provides complex fiber, vitamins, and energy in a format the body digests slowly. The real issue is the overall dietary pattern, specifically the sheer volume of ultra-processed foods.
Because ultra-processed foods overwhelm the system too quickly.
Yes. They are highly concentrated sources of energy with a structural fiber completely removed. They flood the platform with passengers instantly, overwhelming the conductors. Managing diet is about reducing the total influx of energy to a level the system can comfortably process, rather than arbitrarily banning whole food groups.
That brings me to a dynamic I find really troubling. I noticed people treat this entire process like a purity contest. They believe that if they cannot clear the gridlock naturally with sheer willpower, diet, and exercise, they have somehow failed a moral test and are taking the easy way out if they use medical support.
I see that mindset constantly, and it is profoundly damaging to person health. Medical support, whether that means glucose-lowering medication or bariatric surgery, is not a sign of failure. It is a set of highly effective, evidence-backed tools designed to protect your organs from permanent damage.
Walk me through the reality of that medication. Why is avoiding it so dangerous?
Because of the timeline. Sometimes, by the time someone is diagnosed, their pancreas has already lost 50% of its beta cell function due to long-term toxicity. No amount of broccoli or walking is going to magically regenerate those lost cells overnight.
That's a tough reality to face.
It is. Medication acts as a crucial bridge. It chemically lowers the toxic levels of glucose, which immediately stops the plumbing and wiring from degrading further.
So you are using medication to buy the organs time to heal while you work on the lifestyle levers in the background.
Precisely. Stopping medication abruptly without medical guidance just to prove you can do it naturally is reckless. The blood sugar will quietly rise, and the silent damage to your eyes, kidneys, and heart will resume without you feeling a thing.
And bariatric surgery fits into this biological reality too, right? People often view it as a cosmetic shortcut, which feels incredibly dismissive.
It is a massive misconception. Bariatric or metabolic surgery is one of the most powerful structural interventions we have for type 2 diabetes in patients with severe obesity. It is not just about physically shrinking the stomach to restrict calories.
Wait, it is not just restriction. What else is it doing?
It fundamentally alters the endocrine profile of the gut. The surgery changes how food is routed, which massively increases the secretion of gut hormones.
Tell me more about that.
Well, these hormones instantly boost insulin sensitivity and increase beta cell function. Many patients see their blood sugar normalize within days of the surgery, long before they have lost any significant weight.
That is incredible. So it's essentially a biological reset switch. It's a structural intervention for a structural problem, taking willpower completely out of the equation.
Exactly. Completely changes the biological landscape for the patient.
That really reframes the entire conversation. Which brings me to the ultimate takeaway here. When we look at all these mechanics, the exhausted beta cells, the crowded subway platform, the inflammatory visceral fat, the goal isn't just chasing the prestigious buzzword of remission.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
Because success is dictated by an individual's unique biology and how far the wear and tear has progressed.
Right. For one person, pulling the levers of weight loss and daily movement might clear the gridlock completely, resulting in full remission. For another person who catches it early, success is just holding the line at prediabetes and preventing it from progressing.
And that's equally important.
Exactly. And for a third person, success is using medication consistently and proudly to keep their blood sugar perfectly stable, avoiding all that long-term vascular damage.
All three of those scenarios represent massive victories. The ultimate goal is protecting the system, preserving the organs, and maintaining your quality of life. The method you use to get there is just a tool.
I think that is the most empowering part of understanding the mechanics. When you see your body as an intricate engine that simply needs the right fuel routing and the right maintenance, it completely removes the shame and blame. It gives you the clarity to act. Next time you feel that heavy, lethargic slump at 3 in the afternoon after a massive lunch, ask yourself, is it just everyday fatigue, or is that your internal transit system desperately trying to clear the platform?
That is the perfect question to reflect on. Knowledge gives you the power to respond to your biology rather than just reacting to it.
Thanks for listening to TalkKast.